live in a small unexciting town in western New York. It's a peaceful place. I always say everybody knows everybody, but that's a little bit of an exaggeration. It's more like, if I go to the one gas station in town, I'll probably run into a few people I know. I'm not going to use my real name because this story implicates me for breaking and entering. Let's call me Tommy, and my friend Zach. First, a little backstory. There isn't much special or notable about our small town. It's a quiet, low-income area. Kids around here kind of have to make their own fun. That usually meant partying, jumping off the bridge into the river, having fires, playing football, and going to the haunted house. The haunted house is on a back road in town. It's driving distance from anywhere in town. It's a kind of tradition for kids in town to go there. The place was abandoned at the time. The few times it was locked, it was easy to get in. The story of the house is that back in the 70s, a family moved to town and into the house. The kids went to school with my parents. The family claimed to have heard all sorts of noises in the night. The mother claimed to have heard chanting coming from the woods behind the house. They said that certain rooms in the house would randomly become ice cold. Bugs swarmed a specific window of the house. There were rumors of a native burial ground. I've never been able to find solid proof of that, but there are several reservations nearby. The family said that after a while they would hear clear voices and eventually started seeing shadow people around the house. Eventually a local priest was brought in to perform an exorcism. He actually performed a cleansing. From what I've gathered, an exorcism is on a person, a cleansing is done on a place or structure. People still like to say there was an exorcism done there. I guess it's more grabby. Crazy stuff nonetheless for our little town. I had heard stories from friends who claimed to have seen ghosts there, but I never believed them. My mom told me that a kid went missing around there when she was in school, but I'm pretty sure she was trying to scare me. Everybody had a story about the haunted house. I'm a skeptic. I can't help it. Ghost stories interest me, but I have a very hard time believing them. I have to admit that the place is creepy though. It had boarded up windows, chipped up white paint, and one eerie-looking tree out front. The tree is referred to as the hanging tree because of stories of multiple people using the tree to commit suicide. Only one of those cases is documented though. Behind the house was all forest. Most of the town is. Across from the house is a big cornfield leading to more woods. There is quite a bit of space between houses on the road. It would be a nice place to live for someone who values privacy, at least before it became locally famous. I had been up there a handful of times, usually after a night of partying. The party would be winding down and a handful of us wouldn't want to end the night. Someone would suggest going to the haunted house, and we'd head up there. The first few times I went were pretty uneventful. If there were creepy noises, it would be hard to hear them over the sound of kids trying to scare each other. People I was with would claim to see something move, but I would chalk it up to ghosts on the brain. It always seemed to me that people started seeing ghosts right after watching a scary movie. I also thought some of them were just full of shit. I never saw any ghosts or ghouls myself. I think the creepiest thing that happened up there was a neighbor that snuck up and scared the hell out of us. We were in the house looking out the front windows when we saw this guy seemingly pop up out of nowhere. Zach was at the car when we saw someone walking up behind him. It turned out that he was looking for his dog. He knew exactly what we were doing and gave us a little smirk when he left. It's nice when folks let kids be kids instead of calling the cops on some harmless teenagers. I was usually more worried about cops than ghosts. The place was abandoned throughout my high school years, but cops would arrest people for trespassing there. Cops were not a big problem in our small town, one of the major benefits, but people always claimed that there were cameras on the property to catch trespassers. I never saw them but didn't want to take chances. Any of us would be easily identified by most people in town if we were caught on video. We never ended up having issues with the cops though. So visits to the house were a kind of tradition for us. We would go maybe once or twice a year, or whenever the mood stuck, I guess. I never saw anything I would consider supernatural. It was a little creepy to be in the house, but I saw no ghosts. Now in my early 20s, my childhood friend Zach was visiting home from college. I did not attend college. That is unimportant though. I went over to his mom's house and we hung out and had some beers. Maybe a few too many beers. His mom's house was close to the haunted house. It was 2 quick turns and you're there. It would be a long walk, but I would consider it walking distance. As we drank, we got talking about the haunted house with his mom. She was a big-time believer in ghosts. Every time she watched a scary movie when I was over at his house, she'd start noticing how haunted her house supposedly was. It was a little over the top if you ask me. Before long, we ran out of beer. We had asked her to give us a ride to the store since she wasn't drinking. She took us to the store a town over. On the way back, she started talking about the house again. I could tell she was getting excited. She mentioned that she wanted to camp out on or near the property at some point. Me and Zach took it as a hypothetical and said, "Oh yeah, that would be cool." A few minutes later, we were pulling up to the house. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, a man came out to the car. Zach's mom explained that she wanted to talk to someone about camping there. The guy said he couldn't arrange it at that time. He had purchased the house and had paranormal investigators there. This annoyed me. The guy started giving tours and did little group visits for Halloween. It was just kinda lame. The house had been this spooky place that local kids would visit for fun. Half the fun of it was doing something you weren't supposed to be doing. Now it was gonna be some dumb cheesy attraction. It was creepier that there was always a small group of us there. Now there's gonna be tour groups and I just found the whole thing to be really lame. It did bring more notoriety to the house, but it would never be the same for the next generation of kids. Zach's mom decided to ask the neighbors about camping on their property, which, okay, I guess. I guess the property lines touched? She was really on a ghost kick. We indulged her, mainly because she let us drink in the car. There were a few houses on the same road as the haunted house. She stopped at the closest place. There was a woman working out front when we pulled up. Zach's mom explained the camping thing and the woman said no. She looked irritated. I wondered how many people stopped there, asking about the house. She said that we couldn't camp in her yard. I was pretty embarrassed because, well, his mom asked if we could camp in her yard. She drove to the neighbor on the other side of the house next. She said that it would be the last place she would try. It would have been easy to miss. There was a dirt driveway between some trees that led to a small house. It was far enough away from the haunted house that we couldn't see it from the driveway. We had scary stuff on the brain, so when we saw a handful of beat-up old vehicles in the driveway without plates, we got a little creeped out. Nonetheless, we walked up to the front door and knocked. There were lights on inside and we could just barely hear music, but nobody answered the door. We knocked a few more times and waited, but nobody answered. I still don't know which one of us opened the door, but Zach and I both walked in. I'll never forget the music. It was the creepiest music that could have possibly been playing. It was really old-timey music. I've seen horror movies with the same style of music. We joked about walking into the start of a horror movie. After a few moments inside, we went outside and back to the car. We immediately started asking each other why they opened the door. We both swore that the other one did it. It was probably the alcohol, but even moments after going in, neither of us could really remember the thought process of letting ourselves into a stranger's house. Sure, we had done it at the haunted house, but this was different. Someone clearly lived there, and from outside, it seemed like someone was home. We were all a little creeped out, but that's what we were looking for, I guess. After a minute or two, we decided to go back in. I don't know why. I'll never understand why, but we went back in. The terrifyingly eerie music was still playing on a little clock radio by the door. The living room looked normal enough for the most part. The weirdest thing was across from the only couch, there was a black and white drawing or painting, I guess, of an old man. It was all black and white aside from a red line across the cheek with red dripping from it. It looked like a cut on his face. The couch was the only furniture in the living room. The painting was where I would expect a TV to be. The place wasn't very big. It was like a cottage or a cabin, kind of. We started looking through the rest of the place. Looking back, I'm surprised that I was less anxious about it. We worried about cops at the haunted house, but someone lived here. They could come back any minute to find us waltzing around their home. We started in the kitchen. Nothing all that weird. From the contents of the fridge, it looked like a bachelor of some sort lived there. Nothing creepy or scary though. I found a bedroom next. It was almost completely empty other than a bed with no blankets, pillows, or sheets. Just a twin mattress on a frame. The only other thing in the room was a dresser. I looked through the drawers. They were all completely empty other than the top drawer. The only thing in the top drawer was an unopened pack of boys' underwear. Whitey tighties. I found that odd. Shortly after that, Zach and his mom started talking about how creepy it all was. They still thought something paranormal or supernatural was going on. We looked around the side of the house to find a side porch. It was covered with jugs of water. They found that creepy, but I really didn't. It was basically a cabin in the woods. There are lots of reasons to need clean water. We all looked around for a while, not at all concerned that the owner of the place would return. After the fact, me and Zach always talked about how weird it was that we weren't more nervous of getting caught. I blamed the booze. Although I would normally be way more paranoid in a situation like that, regardless of my blood alcohol level, we didn't find much more interesting until I went back inside and looked on the shelves. There were a handful of tapes. Maybe 15 or 20-ish of those blank tapes you record stuff on. I picked one up to see what it said. The only thing on it was a name. Billy. I looked at another one. Same thing. Dylan. One after another, each tape was the same. Every single tape on the shelf had a boy's name written on it and nothing else. I asked Zach's mom if she had a VCR. At this point, VCRs were obsolete, but some people still had one laying around. She told me I couldn't take any of the tapes. I figured she just didn't want me stealing from someone. Then she went on to say that if I took something from somewhere haunted, the ghosts would follow me. I had indulged her enough to that point. Ghosts weren't the horror I was worried about. I told her that I would put the tape back. I slid the tape in my pants and grabbed something else, out of spite I guess. It was a little standing frame with a Bible verse in it. I didn't read it closely before I snagged it. I don't know why I took it. We didn't find anything else interesting after that. We left after exploring the house for what felt like an hour. We mentioned over and over to each other how weird it was that we just strolled in and hung out for a while as if we weren't breaking and entering. Him and his mom went on about ghosts while I attempted to provide reasonable explanations for everything. Everything but the tapes. The tapes bothered me. What could they be? The births of his grandchildren maybe? Piano recitals? I don't know. Birthday parties? We went back to Zach's mom's house where we drank beer and continued talking about the house. We talked about how each of us claimed the other was the one who opened the door. He talked about the haunted house and the stories he had heard about the land. Is it a haunted house or haunted land? I laughed. Haunted tapes? I never knew hauntings were contagious. There are a lot of logic leaps in there. Then I showed him the little frame with the Bible verse. Get it out of here, he shouted. I laughed, but he was dead serious. We walked outside where he insisted we toss it in the woods outside of his mom's property line. I found it silly, but whatever. As we got to a spot that he deemed far enough away that the haunting couldn't reach him, apparently ghosts don't cross property lines. Maybe that's why they're always so pissed off that someone's in their house. They're strongly against trespassing. I read the verse. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance and folly. What a weird thing to have displayed in your living room, I thought. Zach got even more freaked out than he already was. I threw it into the woods, off of their property. Part of me really wanted to go back after he fell asleep to find it so I could leave it somewhere he would find it. It would have been a great prank. Though I have to admit, I wasn't in a hurry to go into those woods alone at night. I kept the tape a secret so they didn't make me throw it into the woods. The next day, I returned home. I wasn't sure what to do with the tape. I searched high and low but couldn't find my old VCR. It must have been in storage. I worried about what was on the tape though. Every time I thought about it, a Criminal Minds episode played in my head. I wondered if it was just spooky stuff on the brain. I always believed that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. I was sure that that was the case with the tape. After another day, my paranoia was getting the best of me. I bet I could go find a VCR right now with no trouble, but of course when I needed one, there was no chance. I didn't exactly know what to do with the tape, so I decided to just drop it off at the police station. There was a police station a town over. It was a very small station. I waited until the middle of the night and headed over there. I waited until I couldn't see anyone. I ran over and dropped the tape on the front steps. Then I took off into the woods through a clearing to where I had parked. I had gotten out of there without them seeing me. I'm just afraid of cops, whether or not I did something wrong. I mean, I did break in. If the tapes are the births of someone's kids, then I'm the only one who committed a crime. I felt a little silly on the way home. I was sure that there was nothing sinister on the tapes. I just had spooky stuff on the brain. There's a reasonable explanation for everything. The very next morning, there was a knock on my door. It was the police. They found my fingerprints on the tape. I had one or two very minor, totally not a big deal priors. Funny that they didn't break out the cheese shit when my house got robbed, but that's another story. They asked me where I found the tape. I was hesitant to tell them that I broke into someone's house. Why, what's on it? I asked. I didn't have a VCR to watch it. There was a long pause. Among other things, the torture and execution of a young boy. You don't need any more details than that. You don't want to know. You're lucky you didn't watch it, the officer said in a somber tone. His eyes welled and a tear ran down his cheek. My heart sank. There's a reasonable explanation for everything. Sometimes that explanation is that humans are capable of evil. I told the cops about us going into the house and where it was. Two of them headed to the house while one stayed and continued questioning me. He told me that the boy in the video appeared to be a boy who had gone missing in the Buffalo area 10 years ago. He wanted to talk to Zach and I didn't want to be alone, so he followed me to his mom's house. Zach's mom was out of town visiting a guy she'd been seeing. Zach was clearly shaken. I had called him and told him what was going on before we went up there. The cop questioned him for a while as I paced back and forth in the kitchen. After a while another cop came to the house. He had come from the cabin. He asked to speak to the other officer in private, but we argued with them until he agreed to loop us in. The unfortunate officers watched the rest of the tapes. Everyone was the same. Each one documented the captivity, torture, sexual abuse, and eventual murder of a boy. They immediately were able to identify two of them. They both disappeared in cities that were over an hour's drive away. The cops theorized that he evaded detection by taking the boys to a quiet cabin in a quiet town far away from the abduction sites. The cabin had generators for power. There was a setup to collect and purify rain. The culprit did everything possible to stay off the grid. The cops had talked to the closest few neighbors. None of them knew anything about whoever was staying there. They didn't know much about each other for that matter. They lived in the middle of nowhere because they valued their privacy. Unfortunately, so did the killer. As the day went on, we waited at Zach's mom's with the officers. Every so often, they would get an update from the police at the cabin. They hadn't found the guy or any evidence of who he was until they watched the last video. The cops on the scene told the cops at Zach's place that the killer could be seen for a quick second at the end of one of the videos. They began circulating the blurry image. The cops asked us if we knew who it was. At first, I didn't recognize him, but after a minute it hit me. I felt sick. We had both seen him. All those years ago in front of the haunted house. I thought about that night. We all had gone up in one car. Zach was the only one outside. The guy probably thought he was alone. I can't help but think about what would have happened if we didn't all walk outside when we did. Would he have attacked Zach? Would we have been able to overpower him? We could have prevented. We told the cops the story about him walking up to Zach, claiming he was looking for his dog. They said that it was a common ruse. They think he would have asked Zach to help look and wait for a chance to subdue him. I felt sick, but Zach was sick. He puked all over the floor as he tried to run to the sink. I tried to calm him down, but there was nothing I could do. After an hour or so, Zach calmed down a bit. He was still very shaken, but able to relax a little. The cops questioned us off and on. We didn't know who the guy was though. That night was the only time either of us could recall seeing him. None of the cops recognized him. It was an everybody knows everybody type of town, so this guy must have kept a very low profile. Zach made some pizza rolls for us and the cops. He didn't have any adult food. The cops asked us to go through the story again, so we did. We went through it again over lemonade and pizza rolls, which was an odd combination. We had calmed down a little. The cops assured us that they would find the guy. They said he wouldn't attack right now out of fear of getting caught. He would lay low. They asked us if we wanted them to stick around. I appreciated the fact that they asked. I was never very fond of the police. I always considered them my only prejudice. These guys were decent though. It felt better having them there. We weren't really worried about the guy finding us. We figured he was long gone. We were just shook. We told them that they could leave though. There wasn't much they could do at Zach's mom's house. After they left, we sat in silence for a few minutes. I think we were both having trouble processing the whole ordeal. Finally, Zach broke the silence. I think we could use a drink. I could use a drink. We went up to his bedroom where he usually had something or other in his little liquor cabinet. He had cheap vodka. He poured 2 shots. We hadn't said much since the cop left. Zach raised his glass like he was toasting and said, "Here's a shot." We did the shot and headed back downstairs. We sat back down on the couch, exhausted. We were starting to calm down. Zach poured some vodka into our glasses of lemonade. We drank and tried to talk about something other than what had happened. It was nice for a few minutes. Zach decided to call his mom. He couldn't find his phone, so I helped him look for it. They didn't have a house phone up there since they all had cell phones. I soon realized that I couldn't find mine either. We searched the house up and down. We checked upstairs in his room, under the couch cushions, even in the fridge for some reason. Nothing. We looked around for a little longer until, on the coffee table, in the middle of a bunch of junk mail and clutter, was the little frame with a Bible verse in it. The sight of it sent shivers up my spine. Zach hadn't noticed it. He was in the middle of saying something when I silently pointed to it. "Fuck you," he yelled. "You really think that's funny?" "I didn't do it, man," I yelled. "Then who did?" He trailed off. "What's going on? Are you okay?" He began stumbling. I started to feel dizzy myself. "What's W?" Zach fell into the coffee table. I tried to help him, but as I stepped toward him I watched my eyelids slowly drop and I stumbled onto the couch. The next thing I remember was waking up groggy on the couch. I looked around to see the living room was a mess. There were magazines, mail, and spilled lemonade all over the floor. I called Zach's name. No response. I got up in a frenzy and started stumbling around looking for him. As the haze started to lift, I realized that he wasn't there. I ran outside and yelled for help. I called Zach's name over and over. I tried to tell myself that it was a cruel joke that Zach took too far. I knew it wasn't true though. He wouldn't joke about something like this, and he definitely wouldn't drug me for a prank. I hated myself for not asking the cops to stay. I didn't know what to do. I considered running to the cabin in hopes that the cops were still there investigating, but it was more driving distance than walking distance. It would take a while to get there and I wasn't even sure that the cops would still be there. It was getting late at that point. I decided to search for our phones again. I ran back into the house, still yelling for Zach. I frantically searched through the couch cushions before I saw it. Not my phone. A tape. My hand shook as I reached for the tape. It was just sitting right there on the coffee table next to the frame with the Bible verse. There was a piece of masking tape on the side of the tape. It had only one thing written on it. Zach. I screamed until my throat was raw. There wasn't a VCR there. We had already looked. I threw the tape on the coffee table. It knocked over the Bible verse frame. That's when I noticed the picture on the other side of the picture with the Bible verse. It was Zach's school picture from probably 5th grade. I sobbed as I thought back to 5th grade. I thought about the time I met Zach, building forts in the woods, riding bikes, trying our first beer. Then I thought about where he might be now. Scared and alone. I broke down in a fit of rage and misery that I had never felt possible. I grabbed the tape and the Bible verse frame and ran out the door. I sprinted down the road in the direction of the cabin. As I ran, I debated knocking on the door of the first house I saw or going straight to the cabin. I ended up running past the few houses on the road between Zach's and the cabin. The lights were off. It was the middle of the night. My gut burned from running, but I never stopped once. I just ran as fast as I could. It took what felt like about an hour to reach the road that the cabin was on. I stopped to catch my breath for a minute in front of the haunted house. I thought about all the stories of evil in this house. All these people who were completely oblivious to the evil next door visiting the house, hoping for a spooky encounter that they could tell their friends about. I wondered if the events next door coming to light would add to the legend of the haunted house. This wasn't supernatural. This wasn't ghosts, or ghouls, or zombies. This was a human being like you or me. A deviant monster who hid in plain sight. I ran to the cabin. I didn't see any cop cars out front. I moved slowly down the driveway, hoping I wouldn't run into the killer. As I got around the trees, I saw one squad car. I had never been so happy to see a cop car. I had never been happy to see a cop car in general. I ran up and banged on the door. One of the officers threw the door open with his gun drawn. I threw my hands up. It was the 2 officers that were with us at Zach's mom's house. "What are you doing here?" one officer asked. "I ran here. I stuttered and sobbed. The cops let me in and sat me on the couch across from the creepy old man painting. I explained to them what had happened. One of the officers left immediately to look for Zach. The other one stayed with me. I gave him the tape and walked him through what happened. They had a VCR and a small TV set up there from when they looked at the other tapes. He said that he needed to see what was on it. "Do you want to go to the other room while I watch it?" he asked. "I want to see it," I said, hesitantly. He popped the tape in. It was just static for about a minute, then shaky footage of bushes and trees. After a few seconds the camera panned toward the outside of the cabin, then toward a car in the driveway. Zach's mom's car. I watched as the camera followed us. The video showed us walking out of the car into the door. It shows us walking in for a moment, then back to the car before deciding to go inside again. We were so close to just leaving. We could have gone home and never have had to watch those horrible videos. Zach would be back at school and the whole ordeal would have been an unexciting memory. I continued watching the footage. The door was open and you could see us walking back and forth in the cabin. Then the camera followed us as we walked outside and looked around. It seemed to follow Zach more than me. The camera even zoomed in on him a few times. You could hear heavy breathing when it zoomed in. It made me sick. All that time we spent talking about how weird it was that we strolled into the house without a second thought, and we had never considered that someone could be watching us. We had spooky stuff on the brain but never thought about someone lurking in the woods, watching us. I felt mentally drained. He could have been watching me right then. It's a thought that has become constant for me. I'm always looking over my shoulder now. The video went on. I assumed it would end when we got in the car and drove away. It went black for a second after the car left the driveway, then jumped to more footage from the woods. It was nighttime in the video. It showed shaky footage of bushes and trees until it landed on a cop car. After that, it panned to Zach's mom's house. It was about 20 minutes of footage of us through the windows. The camera zoomed in on the lemonade we were drinking. It showed the police leaving. The camera panned to the ground as the car pulled out of the driveway. After that, the video showed us walking upstairs. Then he ran toward the house. You could see both hands at times in the video. The camera was mounted to him in some way. The footage shows him quietly open the door and put something in both glasses of lemonade. The camera panned around for a second. You could vaguely hear me and Zach upstairs talking. Then the camera focused on the TV stand where there was a picture of Zach when he was like 7. The camera stayed on it for a minute and you could hear the man breathing heavily. He headed toward the door but stopped in his tracks. He reached into a little satchel and pulled out the Bible verse frame and set it on the coffee table. He walked out the door and into the woods out back. The camera focused on the house as he made his way around to the front where we could be seen through the windows. He watched us walk back downstairs. He breathed heavily as we drank the lemonade. Then the camera turned off. That was the end of the tape. Nothing that could tell us where Zach was, nothing that could tell us where the killer was. The police along with several volunteers searched those woods day after day to no avail. They had a blurry picture of the guy but couldn't identify him. After searching the cabin, the police determined that the man had lived primarily off the grid. Along with the generators that powered the cabin and the rainwater filtration setup, they found a tree stand in the woods behind the cabin. It was full of hunting gear. The woods were full of animal traps. They had nothing to go on. The cars in the driveway were stolen from towns over an hour away. It gave an idea of another area he might be, but some of the cars were stolen from towns in opposite directions. They didn't find the room that was the setting in all of the tapes. They didn't recover any bodies but were able to identify most of the victims from the videos. They believe that he had at least one other property he used. Maybe more. They showed the blurry shot of the man on the news. The tip line got a few calls but it was always the wrong guy. After about a month, the news wasn't covering the story anymore. People in town had all but forgotten about it. Locals still talk about the unverifiable deaths at the haunted house, but never mention the very real horrors that occurred next door. They still give tours at the haunted house and let ghost hunters spend the night, usually to make videos of them pointing out specters and sounds that can't be seen or heard in the footage. That or video of them using gadgets that claim to track ghosts but really just pick up electronic devices. I've looked those up online. They aren't cheap and have no scientific merit. I guess it just gets to me that people are so fascinated in the place. Maybe deep down they know it's all bogus. Otherwise, would they really want to stay in the house? With the constant filming that occurs there, you'd think they would have something compelling on video instead of bogus gadgets and inaudible recordings that they decide are ominous words. Being a ghost must be hell. Stuck in a crappy old house, constantly being bothered by weirdos with Ouija boards. I'm sorry. I've become rather cynical. I lost my innocence over a spur-of-the-moment decision to check out the haunted house. If only we hadn't gone for a beer run. If only we. This is my life now. Thinking back through that day over and over. Thinking about all the chances we had to not go in that house. My therapist tries to tell me that what we did alerted police to what was happening there. Maybe we had prevented the next kid from being taken. That means nothing to me while that monster runs free. It's been 4 years to the day since it happened. Zach's mom has been in and out of the psych ward and so have I. She attempted suicide at least twice. I tried to visit her a few times to see how she was doing, but even seeing me was too painful for her. The one time we did talk, she told me that she still gets phone calls that are just heavy breathing. The cops told her that it's kids pulling a prank. I spent a few months in a psych ward after it all happened. I've been in therapy ever since. It doesn't help. That man controlled my life. I'm always looking over my shoulder. I checked myself into the psych ward on a few occasions because I'm afraid to be alone. I always wanted to have kids, but I know that I never will now. I've become too neurotic. I can't trust anyone. Not that any woman would wanna put up with my paranoid ass. Nor should they. We went up there looking for a spooky encounter. Proof of a haunting. Now we're the ones who are haunted. It's never not on my mind. It controls me. I feel guilty and frightened constantly. I know that Zach's mom has it even worse. She wanted to go up there, and now she'll never see her son again. We were haunted. We are haunted. There is a reason that I'm writing this today. This morning, I woke up from a medication-assisted nap. It's the only way I can sleep now, and only for an hour or two at a time. I went to check the mail. I opened the door to find a VHS tape sitting on the ground out front. I didn't pick it up. I could see it had a name on it. I knew it was mine. Instead of picking it up, I walked into the woods out back of my house. You see, I had put up cameras out front of the house. They're from a set that comes with 3 cameras. I left the sign that came with them up. Anyone could look up the set online and find that it comes with 3 cameras. All 3 of those cameras can be seen out front of my house. I had also done a lot of work in the woods out back. I didn't make a trail, but cut the bushes and brush in a way that you can only get through them in one particular direction. Any other direction was too thick with pricker bushes and trees. I followed the trail a few dozen yards into the woods and there he was, biting down on a stick and trying not to scream. His leg was caught in a bear trap. It was one of several different traps I had placed on the hidden trail. The traps in his tree stand had given me the idea. I assumed if he saw 3 cameras out front, he would feel safe going through the woods to the side door where the cameras purposely couldn't see. For years, I believed he was watching me. I didn't know when, but I just knew he was. After watching the videos from the cabin, I figured he wouldn't be able to help himself. He's clearly obsessive. I guess these days, I am too. I gave him a shot to make him sleep and dragged him down to my basement. I had a chair all ready for him. I tried to make it look similar to the one from the videos so he felt at home. After searching his pockets for identification and not finding any, I chained him to the chair. I wanted to make sure he stayed put, so I had drilled holes through the arm of the chair. I drove screws through his hands and into the hole in the chair. Then I got out my laptop. He woke up about halfway through me writing this. I told him that I would give him time to consider telling me where Zach, or more likely Zach's body was. He has until I finish writing this. I might give him to the police later. I'm worried they'll show him mercy though. I won't. He took that from me. That assumption that people are good, that desire to not sink to their level. He took that from me. I'm haunted now. I guess this is sort of a confession. I'm going to post this, then I'm going to inflict 4 years worth of pain on this man. Years ago, I probably would have called the cops. I'd say that I'm not like him. I don't hurt people. He killed that part of me. I'm not sure what the point of all this is. I guess that there are a lot worse things out there than ghosts and haunted houses. I'll always wonder how things might have been had we never gone up there. Doesn't matter now though. My camera is all set up. My tools are laid out. The moment I've been waiting 4 years for is here. I am haunted. More haunted than that haunted house could ever be. And now, I have a video to make.